Translate Nine Tails, editor Fish Creek. What you said is right, yet also not right. General Chin let out a faint smile. As for the roots of the great ruins, there is simply no path to investigate. However, when our Eternal Peace Empire was established in those years, we received an oracle. Within that oracle it was written, "The Great Ruins is a realm forsaken by the gods, and the people abandoned by the gods must remain in the Great Ruins and never step out. Should any abandoned people come out, they are to be slain without exception." From what I have heard, aside from our Eternal Peace Empire, many other nations likewise received similar oracles. Yet within the Great Ruins there are not only the native aboriginals, there are also vicious men with nowhere left to go, who hide within. In my view, these people are even more perilous than the abandoned people. The seventh young master asked with curiosity, "I saw merchants entering the Great Ruins at the border station. Why must Eternal Peace Empire trade with the abandoned people of the Great Ruins?" Young master may be unaware, though the Great Ruins appears desolate, its natural resources are abundant beyond measure. Rare materials are countless, precious treasures are everywhere, and valuable beast hides can be exchanged for trifles like seasonings. Why would we refuse such dealings? General Chin went on, "With mutual exchange and assistance at the border station with the Great Ruins, I myself do not even know how much we have earned over these years. Using this wealth to supplement military needs has allowed our Eternal Peace Empire to raise a disciplined and mighty army that far surpasses other countries." The seventh young master asked again, "If there are abandoned people who attempt to slip past the border, would that not be disastrous?" Along with the oracle back then, there were also a few treasures. They were called inspection mirrors, and they were hung atop the mountain passes leading into Eternal Peace Empire. So long as one is an abandoned person of the Great Ruins, the inspection mirrors will shine upon them. The Imperial Preceptor surmised that the abandoned people might possess a lineage unlike ours, yet even after examining their bodies, he found nothing different. General Chin smiled. "Each year, those few mountain passes capture many devil people who try to flee into our Eternal Peace Empire. Some are executed on the spot, others are taken away to mine ores. If they can live 1 to 2 years, that is already counted as good fortune." The ship slowly drifted away. Upon the cliff, Chin Mu cried out in admiration, "That man was truly formidable. His eyesight was astonishingly keen. No wonder he could become a general at such a young age. He is attempting to draft the topographic map of Surging River. Could it be that the Eternal Peace Empire is moving its troops into the Great Ruins?" He felt slightly perplexed. The Great Ruins was clearly a barren land, dangers strewn everywhere. Once the sun set, darkness would invade. He did not believe it was a wise move for Eternal Peace Empire to march an army into the Great Ruins. If the Eternal Peace Empire's army that came was too small, it would not be enough to fill the gap between strange beasts' teeth. If it was too large, then when night fell, where would they hide? It was precisely because the Great Ruins held too much danger that no one had ever been able to rule the Great Ruins, not even Eternal Peace Empire. If Eternal Peace Empire were to invade, they would suffer a grievous fall. All at once, Chin Mu recalled something and urgently called out, "Big fella, return to Doom Suppression Palace at once and destroy the map of the Great Ruins." Devil Ape rose, seized Dragon Elephant, and with a roar leaped onto Dragon Elephant's back, then dashed away at full speed. Since Eternal Peace Empire has begun drawing the topographic map of Surging River, if they were to find the map in Doom Suppression Palace, it would only aid them even more. Chin Mu's expression was uneasy as he thought inwardly. Destroying the map would indeed be a pity, yet he had already etched the Great Ruins map deep within his mind. He would never forget it. Not long after, the river water suddenly took on a faint reddish hue. Chin Mu was stunned. He looked upstream only to see the water turning even redder. "Young master, there are corpses in the river!" Hu Linga cried out in alarm. Chin Mu also saw the bodies, yet he said nothing. Looking upstream, more and more corpses drifted down. Beneath the water, huge fish and river beasts churned the current, taking advantage of the moment to devour those corpses, stirring up a tremendous commotion. Opening his heaven's eyes, Chin Mu saw the faces bobbing up and down in the water, and his whole body trembled. These corpses were the very same visitors who had just hurried past Jade Cloud Valley. As the river roiled, the blood red grew ever more intense. Even the floating ice was stained crimson. This was not something a mere 100 corpses could cause. Surging river was exceedingly broad, 3 miles in width. With such swift currents, the blood of 100 people could not possibly dye the river red. Chinmu's expression stiffened as he beheld the tide of corpses flowing down from upstream. It was not merely a tide of corpses. There were thousands of corpses mingled with chunks of floating ice, forming an ice tide of corpses. These were the powerful practitioners who had lain in wait to ambush the general. There had been a great many of them, split into batches, heading upstream and setting up a formation to ambush him. Yet they were all slain by the general. For an ice tide of corpses to form meant these people had all perished at the same moment. They had all died at the same time, beneath the hands of the general or the powerful practitioners on the ship. Chinmu steadied himself. It was still the first time he had seen such a horrifying scene. It was even more gruesome than the slaughtered village he had witnessed when he followed Granny C to deliver a baby in his youth. Back then, his soul had been frightened out of his body and was seized back by Granny C. Now, though he was a martial arts practitioner, his soul still wavered upon witnessing such a sight. Too cruel. If a mere small general of Eternal Peace Empire could be so strong and so ruthless, then if the armoured cavalry of Eternal Peace Empire entered the Great Ruins, what terrifying impact would it bring upon these savage lands? Chinmu shook his head and forced away the unease. He then turned to Hulinger and cautioned, "These few days, do not go out to drink. Tell your sisters to behave as well, and do not go out." Hulinger immediately nodded. Though she was a demon, the scene before her eyes had terrified her. "Linger, return first and find your sisters. I will go down to take a look, in case these thousands of corpses pile up and form a dam." After saying this, Chinmu leaped down and ran along the cliff wall until he reached the river surface. He then stepped upon the river and departed. These corpses, stacked with the floating ice, wherever they passed, they swept up yet more drifting ice, surging ever downstream. Chinmu quickly caught up to the ice tide of corpses and saw that it was growing larger. As the ice slabs collided with one another, producing grinding sounds, the corpses were crushed into shattered fragments, while floating atop the ice. After sprinting 3 miles downstream, the floating ice had already piled into a terrifying ice mountain upon the river, with corpses hanging from it. The ice tide and the ice mountain grew heavier and taller as they slowly pushed forward. Even the river water flowing downstream was being blocked, causing the river surface behind to rise. Chinmu furrowed his brows. The river still ran straight, yet upon reaching the oasis where Woman Wu was, surging river would bend. If the floating ice could not pass through there, it would jam and become a dammed lake. The river water and the floating ice would accumulate over time, stacking up to 300 yards in height. When the ice tide and ice mountain could no longer bear the pressure, they would shatter and collapse. A monstrous flood would sweep forth and devour everything in its path, whether human or beast. All would be carried away by the torrent. There were many villages in the Great Ruins built along the riverbank for convenient travel. If the flood were to burst out, he had no idea how many villages would be destroyed by the catastrophe. Granny Sai and the others are still downstream dredging the river. They likely have no idea a dammed lake is about to form here. Only village chief remains in the village, and it is inconvenient for him to move. So who can help me resolve this ice tide problem? Chinmu racked his mind with all his might. The ice tide had already flowed past disabled elderly village, grinding as the ice chunks crashed into one another. With his strength, there was no way he could settle the ice tide. At the village entrance, village chief had been calm and unmoved, yet the instant he saw Chinmu and the ice tide drifting by before the village, his eyes widened. He then shook his head and smiled. This punk causing trouble again. Because of the blockage from the ice tide, the river level had nearly spread to his legs. At that moment, vital chi poured forth from where village chief's leg had been broken, transforming into 2 legs. He stepped up into the sky and sat down, looking at Chinmu. These legs were formed from vital chi and looked no different from real legs. If his vital chi dispersed, those legs would vanish as well. That's right, I can seek out Woman Wu. Upon the river, Chinmu's eyes brightened, and he immediately quickened his steps. With a few strides across the river surface, he leaped onto an ice mountain. With a surge of force, he sprang forward and left the ice tide behind. He sped ahead like flying and in only a short while reached the oasis at the heart of the river. The oasis was like a lone island. Upon the island stood a temple that was suppressing an old monster named Woman Wu. Chinmu arrived in a few steps and charged straight into the dilapidated temple. Inside the temple, a little girl with 3 braids was swinging her legs in utter boredom, waiting for her prey to deliver themselves to the door. Seeing Chinmu rush in, her eyes turned red with fury upon meeting her foe. The little girl immediately leaped down from the Buddha's hand and hid behind the Buddha statue, staring fixedly at Chinmu with hatred. "Woman Wu, I mean no harm," Chinmu hurriedly explained. "The ice tide is almost here. I need your help to shatter the ice tide." The little girl came out from behind the Buddha statue and jumped back onto the Buddha's hand without much interest. Not interested. The ice tide happens every year, and with the protection of the Buddha statue here, the ice tide won't flood this place. Chinmu's gaze flickered as he said, "I can sever your chains and set you free." Woman Wu's eyes lit up, then quickly dulled again as she shook her head. "If it were the elders in your village, they could cut off the chains, but you cannot." Chinmu's vital chi surged outward, sweeping up the junior protector sword from his back, and he brought it down in a cleaving chop. Clank! A tremendous sound rang out, and one of the chains wrapped around the great Buddha split with a deep crack. What was strange was that the crack upon the chain was actually healing by itself. Without further explanation, he roused his vital chi and chopped down again. Clank, clank, clank! A series of crisp sounds rang out, and a chain was soon severed by Chinmu. Woman Wu was dumbstruck. Astonishment and joy surged within her heart. However, the copper Buddha suddenly opened his eyes and bellowed in a thunderous voice, "Evil creature, how dare you ruin my religious practice and spoil my merit?" Translator, Nine Tails. Editor, Fish Creek. "Ruining your cultivation of the Dharma, ruining your so-called merit?" Chinmu let out a cold laugh as he sliced through the remaining shackles. You're nothing but a copper-forged Buddha effigy. Where would merit come from? Is this merit of yours the act of binding Woman Wu here? Yet when Woman Wu feasted upon human flesh right before you, you closed your eyes and pretended not to see. If you truly had merit, it would have long since been squandered by you." The great Buddha's body trembled, the blood-like inscriptions upon its copper frame flaring with radiance. With golden leaves draped over it, it became a towering Buddha blazing with golden brilliance, and it spoke in a muffled bell-like voice. "Do you know how many will be devoured and ruined if you release it? I only know it hid countless bones behind your back and used you as a blade to commit evil. I don't see you doing anything about it." Chinmu severed the second chain and sneered. "The ice tide outside this temple surges several times each year. What have you ever done about it? If one resolves the calamity of the ice tide, that is called merit. But sitting in a temple to restrain a monster is not, much less letting the monster eat people. If you shattered the ice tide to save the common folk downstream, then you would possess great merits." The Buddha statue blazed with a golden glow, and its hands moved as though it were coming alive. Woman Wu immediately cried out in alarm, "That old bald donkey is an evil Buddha. He means to purify me to death. Hurry up!" Chinmu moved like lightning, flashing out of the temple as he wielded Junior Protector Sword to cut apart the chains outside. The sins of all living beings must be washed away by the flood. Only then may they rid themselves of evil. They reap what they sow. Boom! A violent quake erupted as the copper Buddha rose and smashed through the temple roof with its head. It roared like thunder, shaking heaven and earth. "Evil spirit! How dare you defile the Buddha's teachings? You stubborn, wicked creature cannot be enlightened." The chains that had bound the copper Buddha and Woman Wu seemed to awaken in an instant, shrieking through the air as they shot toward Chinmu. "Your Buddha's teachings speak of saving oneself by saving others, not saving others for the sake of saving them. Hypocrite!" Chinmu leaped, narrowly evading a chain's coiling strike. With Junior Protector Sword, he hacked down the final chain. If you had killed Woman Wu back when you subdued it, that would still have been your merit, but you merely restrained it and still allowed it to harm people. Why? Because devouring people is its sin, and the greater its sins, the greater your merit for purifying it. Bah! The sins Woman Wu has accrued for those it ate should be counted as your sins as well. Clank, Junior Protector Sword struck the chains, and an immense force surged from the links, knocking the precious sword aside. Qin let out a muffled grunt and staggered back, dodging the chains that writhed like two black pythons. He sneered again. With the flood encircling this whole temple, you not only sit here refusing to help people, you even stop me from helping them, and you still dream of attaining merits? Let me tell you, in my village, there are many elders who battle the ice tide every year, saving common folk and beasts, saving countless lives. If one could become Buddha through merit alone, every one of them would already be a golden body, great but like you, a mere copper statue. Absurd! The copper Buddha was enormous. With a single lift of its leg, it strode out of the dilapidated temple. It pressed its palms together. The iron chiming of the chains rang out as the Buddha's body shone and blasted Qin backward. Qin limbs and bones jolted as he hung suspended in midair, while chains whipped toward him. Stepping onto the chains, he sprinted along them, driving his vital chi to control Junior Protector Sword as it chopped down upon the final chain that still shackled Woman Wu. The chains crisscrossed in midair like monstrous pythons, striking at Qin from every angle in a blinding flurry. The copper Buddha was clearly cast from brass, yet it moved with incredible agility, utterly inconceivable. Earlier, the copper Buddha could not distinguish Qin from Woman Wu. Only when Qin used the devil voice would it react of its own accord, chanting Buddhist mantras to purify Woman Wu. Now that Qin had tried to free Woman Wu, the copper Buddha changed tactics and began attacking Qin automatically. Thick chains shot toward him from all directions, and Qin stepped onto one chain to evade the rest of the assault. The power carried through the copper Buddha's chains steadily grew stronger. The trembling produced by the chains grinding against one another made Qin unsteady. His legs ached from the vibration, and his control over Junior Protector Sword became less precise than before. The copper Buddha grew stronger and stronger, as though limitless strength slept within its body. At this moment, that strength was awakening little by little. Granny Sai and Cripple had once spoken of this copper Buddha, saying there was something strange about it. Granny Sai had said she once decided to eradicate Woman Wu, but the copper Buddha stopped her, and she failed. Granny Sai was naturally terrifyingly powerful, yet she could not eliminate Woman Wu. This meant that once the copper Buddha's strength fully awakened, it would be unimaginably dreadful, and now the copper Buddha's strength was awakening bit by bit. Even if only partially awakened, it was not something Qin could withstand. At that very moment, a heaven-shaking crash rang out. The ice tide from upstream had finally reached the oasis. The towering mountain of ice, dozens of yards high, surged down upon violent currents and appeared right before the oasis, directly behind Qin. Qin was instantly swallowed by its shadow. He hurriedly turned his head, only to see countless ice blocks squeezing against one another, rolling up to the summit of the ice mountain before tumbling back down into the river. New ice blocks were pushed up to the summit again, only to roll down once more. With the ice tide crushing everything in its path, the corpses upon the ice were ground into fragments that could no longer be found. The only thing left was that rolling ice mountain surging forward, pulverizing all in its momentum. Tut! The copper Buddha seemed to sense the imminent peril as well. It could no longer spare attention for Qin. It spread its arms wide toward the onrushing ice tide, trying to force it back. Bang! A gigantic golden bell formed around the oasis from rays of light, enveloping the entire oasis. Countless ice blocks slammed into the golden bell, producing thunderous bangs as they shattered from the shock. Each floating ice piece that struck the bell sent ripples of golden light spreading outward. From Qin angle, it was a splendid and majestic spectacle. Then the full ice tide struck, and the sound was like heaven's thunder, deafening to the ears. Amid the roaring chaos, The ringing of the golden bell could also be heard. Nature's might clashed against the Copper Buddha's Buddhist divine art in a world-shaking contest. Even the oasis swayed from the vibrations as if it might sink into the water at any moment. The ice tide was blocked by the oasis and the golden bell, and thus it grew taller and taller. The ice tide on both sides had already continued to flow downstream past the oasis's flanks. Only where the oasis blocked it did more and more floating ice accumulate. Gradually, the ice tide showed signs of flowing over the oasis. Rattle, the chains shook and shot toward Chin Mu. This Copper Buddha actually still had spare energy to control the chains like spirit serpents, pursuing him without mercy. At the same time, the Copper Buddha moved, sending forth sonorous clangs of metal striking metal as its palms repeatedly struck the walls of the golden bell to reinforce it. The chains coiled around its body and flew ceaselessly with its movements as they attacked Chin Mu. Meanwhile, Woman Wu, still in the form of the little girl, Xian Qing'er, staggered from the pull of the chains and suddenly stumbled, its face becoming badly battered as it was dragged about in misery. Chin Mu stepped onto the chain and immediately felt the great Buddha's strength diminish by a large margin, no longer as terrifying as before. Seizing the chance, he swung Junior Protector Sword down with a loud clank, severing and snapping the final chain. Woman Wu froze, unable to keep from both astonishment and delight as it lifted its arms, seeing the two golden loops around its wrists and the broken chains attached. There were also golden loops around its ankles, dragging two broken chains behind. "Stop staring and move!" Chin Mu shouted as he flew over. Woman Wu threw back its head and laughed. Its body suddenly bulged and swelled rapidly. Xian Qing'er's skin split open at random, revealing its true form. A body covered in bones. Its 100 legs danced in the wind as it shouted, "Little brother, jump onto my body and I'll take you out of here!" Chin Mu landed atop its body. This great demon's frame was clad in bone armor as it barreled toward the rear of the oasis. Dragging the golden loops and chains, its legs moved with terrifying speed and soon lifted it into the air. The 100 legs beneath its long body moved in unison as it tore through the air and slammed toward the wall of the golden bell. "Evil creature, you are my merit, and you still think of fleeing?" The Copper Buddha turned, its brass hand reaching into the void as though grasping emptiness itself. The golden loops and chains on Woman Wu's body clattered and began flying backward. At the same time, the chains wrapped around the Copper Buddha also rose of their own accord, as if trying to reconnect with the broken ends. Woman Wu's blood turned cold. It was yanked down by the pull on the chains. The force coming from the chains on its legs grew stronger and stronger, actually dragging it backward without pause. It used all the strength in its 100 legs to crawl forward with all its might, yet it could not help being pulled back. Chin Mu was about to use Qi to guide his sword and cut away the golden loops on Woman Wu's limbs when suddenly an extremely fine ray of light flashed past, splitting open the golden bell, then piercing between the Copper Buddha's eyes. The Copper Buddha howled, its palm snatching toward the front of its eyes. Woman Wu instantly felt its body lighten and immediately fled at full speed. In a few steps it rose into the air, bursting out from the area enveloped by the golden bell, vanishing across the river's surface. Behind them, the Copper Buddha howled again and again. Suddenly the golden bell crumbled, and the mountain-like ice tide crashed down, burying the oasis along with the Copper Buddha. The ancient temple was shattered in that instant. The entire oasis was flattened. "You and I have always minded our own business," the Copper Buddha raged. But before it could finish speaking, it was forced down into the river by the ice tide, along with the oasis.